Hello and welcome to GMI, the Guitar and Music Institute podcast number 6. What do Mark Knopfler, Simple Minds, Aly Bain, Big Country, the Blue Nile, Wet Wet Wet, Prefab Sprout, Nazareth and a whole host of other bands have in common about today's podcast? Well, I'm with Calum Malcolm, who's recorded all of them and a lot more besides. This is going to be an amazing interview. I've really been looking forward to this, as I have said this about all the past podcasts, but this one's no different, and this one's really special. Callum's a fantastic producer. Calum, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Jed. Nice to see you after all these years.
Calum, how did it all begin? When I was looking at your website, I was just absolutely astounded by not just the amount, but the range of different types of music that you've recorded. And I want to explore that a little later, but how did it all begin?
Well, I think the first experience I had of recording would have been with my dad's tape recorder, because he had one. Lots of people did back then, but he had one, and I used to muck about with it and not really understand what I was doing.
Was that a reel-to-reel?
It was everything was, yeah. This would have been 1960 or 61.
So how big was it? Was it massive?
It was a ferrograph, so it was a big, heavy machine, and sort of semi-professional. And he just used it to record stuff off the radio.
Okay.
And that's what I did as well, recorded stuff off the radio.
Was that legal back then?
I think it was. I don't think there was any problem with that. Yeah,
Okay.
You would record concerts. Radio 3 concerts is what I used to enjoy doing, because they would have been one-off things.
Of
and
course.
I wish I still had half of those tapes, to be honest.
What were they actually recorded onto?
Quarter-inch tape.
Quarter-inch tape.
That's it. Stereo. Oh, no, mono, of course. That was a mono machine. But my physics teacher at school had the stereo version, which was mind-blowing. And he eventually coerced me into doing all the school concerts with it. And he taught me a bit about it. He was a great teacher. I loved him. And we were very fortunate. We just had a great physics teacher, which gave an interest anyway in that side of things. And he had a couple of microphones, and we used to set up a pair of microphones in the school hall and record the appalling orchestras or whatever we were doing.
And are you saying that the school orchestra was as bad back then as they are now?
They always are, of course.
Yes,
they are.
screeching away.
Everyone doing their best. But
Yes.
But that gave me a taste for it, and at the same time, I was in the school choir, and it was kind of a chamber choir, and apart from having a good physics teacher, we had a great and enthusiastic music teacher. And I'm sure this is a theme for a lot of people who have ended up in our business. If you got a good start, if you had a good teacher way back when you were 10 or 12 years old, what a difference that makes to the rest of your life. And he was exceptional, I think. And he was responsible for getting my interest in harmony in particular, and teaching me about harmony. And it was only singing, nothing else. I was taking piano lessons at the time, but it was just usual school piano lessons. But he was good at harmony, and we became quite a good wee choir, and were invited to sing now and again and broadcast. The BBC asked us to go and sing at Queen Street, the old studios at Queen Street in Edinburgh. And then we made a recording at Craig Hall Studios in Edinburgh.
So were you based in Edinburgh at the time? Your family were from Edinburgh? Okay.
Yeah. And there was Benjamin Britten had written an operetta called The Golden Vanity, and it had never been recorded, though it had been performed. And he was still alive at the time. And we rehearsed and went to Craig Hall Studios, which was owned by Bryce Lane, a well-known figure. Basically, that was the only studio in Scotland at the time. There was only one. And it was a proper professional studio. It was all the best gear. And he worked for EMI a lot, and he had a company called Waverley Records, I think. Mm-hmm. This would have been in the 50s and 60s. Right. And I'm specifically at the moment talking about 1967, about that time. And I was gobsmacked going into a studio. I thought it was the best thing ever. And
was it big?
Well, that's reasonable size.
Was it all that sort
big.
of wood and...
Well, I had slot hack on the walls, which was kind of a slotted material. You used to see it at the BBC, properly done. And it was all Neve and Studer and all the best stuff. Not that I knew at the time what it was. And
So how did he manage to fund all that at that time?
how did he do it? Did he not have a shop called George Jeffreys up the bridges in Edinburgh? And Jeffreys was a kind of home store, so soft furnishings, that sort of thing. And they were very successful. This was long before the days of chain stores and big,
So he was using that to fund his real passion.
I think he did, yeah. And he maybe had a hi-fi department there. I'm not really particularly aware of that side of it. I never went to the store, but I know my mum and dad would say, "Oh yeah, Jeffreys is it was like Jenner's, kind of that sort of thing, but not as posh or big. But it was more, and just so it was one of the institutions in Edinburgh at the time. And Bryce either, I don't know if he owned it or it was in his family or something like that, and he used that money from that, I think, to fund Craig Hall. But Craig Hall was successful. Some great stuff. All the Pilot stuff came out of that.
Really?
Billy Lyle was the piano player at the time for Pilot, and he was the engineer, and he was a great engineer at Craig Hall Studios back in the, I suppose, the late 60s, or early 70s. And Bryce also had a mobile truck, and he was responsible for recording the Edinburgh Tattoo, but also these
guys must have cleaned up.
Oh, it was amazing. He did all the EMI recordings at the time, and EMI Waverley was a record, and it would have been Kenneth McKellar and all the, Andy Stewart, all the
stuff my grandma had.
Yeah,
she had all the albums.
All that stuff. So that would all have been done by Bryce, probably, or some of it was done in London, Abbey Road, and all that. They would have, because they were big stars at the time. Yeah. Sold a lot of records, but he used to do the Royal Tournament as well at Earl's Court.
Was that with the gun carriages and all that
stuff? Yeah, it was like it's like the Tattoo. It's the same thing. Yeah. The Royal Tournament, same kind of thing, but it was indoor. And Bryce used to take his truck down and do it, and it was very good actually. That again gave me an interest, just going and doing that recording. I do remember my voice breaking during the recording, which was catastrophic for me because I had to stop halfway through and not be singing anymore. So I was relegated to turning pages for the pianist. Right. My chief memory was turning over 2 pages at once and messing everything up, of course. My first major mistake in a recording studio.
Turning pages without making any noise is a lot of...
It's like a talent.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you think maybe there's a job for me in that page turner?
But that was the spark for the whole thing.
So what was the main, I guess, motivation behind it or driver? Was it the technology? Was it the creativity? Was it a meld of both of these?
A real combination of a love of music and this whole idea of being able to record music. I thought it was and I didn't listen to much pop music at the time. I just didn't, because my dad was crazy on 20th century classical music. He was totally into it. Stockhausen, Stravinsky, Bartók, all of that. That's all we grew up with in our house.
The Blood Red Moon and all that stuff.
And that was a big influence as well, that whole thing. And I only came to pop music much later because he wasn't listening. My brother loved classical music as well. And so I never really got much exposure. In fact, I got more exposure at school to popular music.
Yeah. What was the size and weight of the equipment back then? I take it was all pretty huge.
Yeah, well, it didn't really change that much. It improved greatly up until they stopped doing the analog stuff or the heavy digital stuff. But it really, from then until about to the mid-90s, nothing much changed. It just got better. Analog got better and better. And it was still great big consoles and great big tape machines, and everything cost hundreds of thousands of pounds.
So from there, what was your route into actually starting to record?
Mm-hmm. When I finished school, I was off to do astronomy at St Andrews. And in the holidays, I got a job at a hi-fi shop, top of Leith Walk, Hi-Fi Corner, which altogether seemed far more interesting than astronomy.
Did that go right into the 70s, the Hi-Fi Corner?
Still open.
Still open, yeah, I thought, yeah.
Passed it yesterday.
Unbelievable.
The day before yesterday, yeah. A nice guy ran it, a guy called Russ Andrews. And I went to work in my summer holidays there. I asked them if we had a job, and they did. So I was just a lackey and enjoyed it, but I really, really enjoyed it. And customers used to come in. This was 1972, maybe 2 or 3, I would have said.
Okay.
And customers used to come in, and some of them used to ask about recording, does anyone do recordings? Because again, there wasn't an industry up here back then. I mean, London had all the studios, but Edinburgh had pretty much nothing. Craighall was it. There would have been Thor in Glasgow, which went on to become Sava.
Right.
And so the guy who had the shop said, "Yeah, Calum will do recordings for you."
That was nice of him. So he had all the gear there for you to
no,
use?
we just had a tape recorder, but I had 2 microphones that were good. I used all. In fact, that was the reason I wanted that job, because I saved enough from that and caddying at the golf courses during the holidays to buy 2 microphones.
Was that the golf courses out here in East Lothian?
Because at that time we lived down in Gullen. We'd moved out. So
for all those out there, and I know there's a lot of listeners in America, East Lothian, which is about 20 miles east of Edinburgh, is just full of golf courses, isn't it, Calum?
Yeah.
So.
I mean, there's 6, I think there are 5 or 6 in Gullen. Although Muirfield is in Gullen, where the British Open's held.
Right.
But I used to caddy on Muirfield. That's what I did.
Wow.
£1 a round from the members, or £2.50 from the Americans.
Wow. So I take it $2.50 back then was massive.
It was incredible. Yeah.
So how much? Do you remember how much these microphones cost?
£35.
And you got any idea of what that would be in today's money?
I don't know. No, I've still got them.
You still got them?
Oh yeah.
So with the
Calrec 1050s, if you're interested.
Say that again.
Calrec
CM
1050 is the model.
Wow.
Aye.
So
2 of them.
Do you still use them?
No.
Why?
They don't sound very good.
All right.
Cheap. They were cheap.
I just wondered that with
okay.
age, you know, you would want to get that original kind of sound, but it doesn't work like that.
You know, the good stuff, even back then, was pretty dear, and took me a long time to get to that point where I could afford decent microphones. But that summer, I just worked, and I said to my mum and dad, "Listen, I'm not going to do astronomy." And I don't think they were that crestfallen, actually, because astronomy, great fun, I suppose. I don't think I was good enough. I don't think my maths would have been good enough at the end of the day. And you have to be pretty smart to get away with doing astronomy. And I think I was lucky to have avoided it.
So is this back in 1972?
Yes.
Right. Were you at that time thinking there was a 9th planet?
Well, there was, and there still is.
Well, I know, this is the thing, isn't it? Downgrading one.
A 10th one, or
Nibiru.
A new 9th one,
Is
which
it?
I don't agree with at all. But
Nibiru.
Or whatever it is.
The bringer of death.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's for another podcast.
No, but there was a vague... My sister-in-law's sister's husband was an astronomer. And he took me around he worked at the observatory. Funnily enough, he taught my wife, Yvonne, he taught her astronomy at university. No, she's not an astronomer. She did geography. But every geographer at that point was taught some astronomy.
Oh, really?
And he had taught her. She went to his lectures, and he took me around the observatory. I mean, it was totally mind-blowing. It was great what they were doing, and just to see the basics of how it worked, because the way that they always look at negatives, never at positives. They look at the star maps that they look at are white with black marks in it, because it's dead easy to see, as opposed to the other way around, and all that stuff. I was really hooked and fascinated. I thought it would be a great thing to have done. Actually, it would have been great. It would have been interesting.
Yes. But we better stop talking. You'll end up running off there.
No, because you have one huge eye.
Do you know the problem, since we're talking about? I mean, I find astronomy fascinating, but it's just that I'm always under the impression that you're kind of, just as you're dying, they're going to find something else that's more interesting. At least with music, there's an end result.
Yes, absolutely.
So you saved up for these microphones, and you're getting work from Hi-Fi Con.
Started doing recordings, as simple as that. And they were all location things, and they would be things like school choirs or amateur groups or whatever, and something that you could record with 2 microphones. And I made my mind up at that point that actually that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted to do that, but I wanted to do it myself somehow. So I carried on.
What was the real buzz about it, Calum? Was it just the capture of sound?
Yeah, to begin with, it was how to try and record it and make it sound real somehow. I don't think I was interested at all in production, just recording. I liked the idea of being able to listen to somebody and then record it, and for it to sound the same if possible. That was the interest for me to begin with.
So once you had recorded it, what did you do with the recordings?
Well, the people used them. They would be made into records. Quite a few of them, They were just, there was no mixing or anything. That was it. The recording would be cut,
And that's it.
that's someone, and that's all. That was the way it happened.
And I guess it was a very expensive process to get a record
I
cut.
think it was probably not prohibitively, but yeah, would have been dear. And I suppose about that time cassettes were coming in. Well, they were becoming popular, and you could get cassettes duplicated probably quite a bit cheaper than doing records. So that was a big thing as well.
So you're starting to record. What was there a break, or was it just an evolution of what you were doing? I mean, was there something that happened that really got you noticed and led to a lot more work? And
Well, not really. It began to pick up a bit of pace, and I stayed on at Hi-Fi Corner and worked there for another year, a full-time job after the summer holiday, and I enjoyed the sensation of earning money as well. I mean, great first job. It's a great feeling, and then I briefly went to Napier University and did electronics for a course in electronics. I was going to do a degree, but I stopped. I did it up to a point and stopped. It wouldn't have been a degree. No, it would have been an HND.
HND, a 3-year course language.
Yes, at that point, because Napier was a college.
Yes. It's funny because I was talking to Philip Thorne recently, and he was talking about Napier and how it used to be the College of Commerce or something. It was called something like that.
I think it might have been, yeah. That's right. It was just that campus at Merchiston, at the Holy Corner there.
Yes.
But that actually taught me quite a lot that year. It was good. Had a good lecturer there. I have no idea. I can't remember his name now, but it's a long time ago. And then I thought that was it. I still was working at Hi-Fi Corner. It was a part-time thing, and I thought, this is it. I'm just going to open a recording studio. So I had very little equipment, stereo tape recorder, and by then maybe 4 or 5 microphones of varying. Still my 2 originals, which were the best 2, and some cheaper rubbish. And I rented a room. And it was back in the day when you could do stuff like that. You didn't need to jump through every hoop. And I still had to go to the bank and start it wasn't a limited company. It was I don't know what it was, sole trader or whatever.
Yeah.
It would have been called something else.
Yeah.
But a business at the time had to open a bank account, basically. That was all. And not even register it, just have a bank account. And I rented a room at the top of Dublin Street. And called it Castle Sound, and that was 1974. And I built a place out of egg boxes and all the rubbish, and divided the room with a stud. Did all the work, of course, with a couple of pals. And
so Dublin Street's in the New Town, isn't it?
Right off St Andrew's Square.
Right.
Yeah, very close to the middle. I mean, again, you wouldn't be able to think about that today, but that was so long ago, and space was cheap.
So what were you recording in there?
Immediately everyone. I mean, it was astonishing because there wasn't much going on. There weren't really. There was a Radio REL Studios, another studio in Edinburgh. Craig Hall still on the go.
Sheen's?
No, Athol Crescent at the time, or Athol Place, sorry, on just before Haymarket.
Right.
Laterally in Sheen's.
Right. So you were recording drums in this place?
Oh yeah. Well, I hadn't soundproofed it, but it was above a betting shop. Nobody bothered, and it was shut at night. So it was fine. You could record all the time. And I mean, within a year, the Bay City Rollers were there doing, and that was 1975, and they were huge at that time.
So they just contacted you?
They just came in. In fact, they came to buy. I had upgraded things by then because business was coming in, and I'd bought a 4-track machine, and that maybe about a year into its life was not suitable. I wanted to get something better, and I put it for sale, probably in the paper, in Evening News it would be. And they phoned up and came and bought it and saw it was a studio and booked in. And we did loads of demos and stuff. Loads of stuff for a couple of years. They were there a lot. Good customers.
The Evening News?
I would have advertised.
That's incredible.
I know.
It's there's such sort of synchronicity and all this. It just all makes...
Small community then, though, Jed. There wasn't... I mean, a long time before the internet, before anything else like that, the communities were smaller, and people would be in touch more. Everyone would read a paper at night, or their mums, or whatever. People would pick up the Evening News, or people would be
reading the font of all human knowledge by then.
Or the Herald or the Scotsman.
Yeah.
It didn't, or the Glasgow, or the Evening Times. I mean, that was about it, wasn't it? How else did you get information?
So and I take it once you're recording the Bay City Rollers, that's going to get the word out big time, is it?
Well, I mean, there was always a good stream of work, and then Robin Morton used to come in with. I started doing quite a lot of folk music, or traditional music, you should call it today, but it was just the Boys of the Loch. I did a number of albums with them. Aly Bain was in the band at the time, and so we did lots of albums. The Battlefield Band, just some really lovely albums. About 1976, I felt I kind of knew what I was doing. I began to get a grip of it by then, I think.
So you've been recording for how long?
That would have been 3 years in, really.
This is something that obviously I've been around recording studios a lot and do a little bit of recording myself, but just on I don't want to say a semi-pro basis, but it is. But how did you find actually recording different styles of music? Did you find there was did you have to work differently depending on what was there?
Absolutely differently, because I still had classical music was still something that you would never record in a small studio. You would do it at Abbey Road Studio 1, but you wouldn't do it in Castle Sound, or you would maybe do a quartet at the most. But that was still something in my mind that you did in a concert hall or a recital hall or a church, because the acoustic was a very important part of what that type of music is. It depends on it in many ways, whereas pop music's made up much more and very close mic. And at the time, I mean, things change, of course, but that was the perception at the time. Pop music was quite dry and close and dead sounding, so you had lots of control and separate. Things were separated, and classical music and jazz were the opposite, where everything kind of spilled into. Well, jazz was kind of in between those two, where you needed some control, but it wasn't so dependent on an acoustic. And I just learned all that as I went along. And the one thing I really wish I'd had was a good teacher at that point. I don't mean going to college to do it. What I mean is, I kind of wish I'd been in a recording studio for a couple of years as a tape op, like they used to be, and learn from a great engineer. That would have been good. That would have taken years off what I had to do, I think. I would have got better quicker.
Well, I have in my list of questions here to talk about music education or education sound production. It's kind of far down the list, but seeing that you brought it up, it might be a good time to talk about that. But before I do, I just want to say this is GMI, Guitar and Music Institute. You're listening to me, Jed Brockey, speaking with sound producer Calum Malcolm. Calum, let's carry on and talk about music education then. There are so many courses now on sound production. Seems like they're churning out hundreds of these people every year. What do you think of them?
Well, there are some good ones, there's no doubt about it. But they're few and far between. I do think that. And I don't think I can't imagine many people going into these courses thinking they're going to come out and get a job in a recording studio, for a number of reasons. There aren't really very many recording studios these days, and the few that there are, and I'll give you an example here, Snap Studios in London, which is run by or owned by Mark Thompson. Funky Junk is a supplier of new and used recording equipment, and Mark's old school, and he opened a lovely studio in London, very well equipped. It's been pretty successful. Lots of others have closed down, but they're going, and they advertised last year, or the year before, I can't remember, for a new assistant. And the only qualification that the assistant had to have was not having done any course at college.
Wow.
So it sort of sums it up. That was the requirement.
Is that because, were they wanting to mould someone in their own fashion?
They want to teach. They don't want to be learning. They don't want someone who comes in who's a total whiz on Pro Tools and can do it upside down, but can't hear, can't listen to what they're doing, and are obsessed by equipment, which is a lot of the problem. People seem to think equipment makes a difference. My personal view is equipment makes almost no difference when you're making a record. I don't particularly care what microphone I'm using. I do to a certain extent, but in general, I'll tell you what a good microphone is. The one that's closest to me at the time. and providing it's within parameters, that'll be fine. It's the one that we're going to set up and use. There are some things that I wouldn't use on certain instruments, but by and large, it's nothing to do with that. It's the noise that the people are making. People pull their hair out about vocal microphones and what's good and what's bad. It doesn't matter, really. I mean, I can put a good singer in front of a Shure 57, which is about 90 quid, and put them in front of an Neumann U47, which at the moment is about 13,000 quid, an old one. And you'll be fairly pushed to tell the difference, really.
Wow, that is an incredible thing to hear.
They're very, very similar in many ways, and a lot of people know this. It's different.
So is it?
But it's not.
Is it marketing?
Different. I think it's just
in terms of
there's a lot of bullshit, frankly, but there's a lot of people using the equipment almost as an excuse. It's an obsession. It's just people use different mic preamps for this, that, and the next thing. I'm sorry. It really doesn't matter. If you've got someone who sounds great, they will sound great, and no amount of equipment and tweaking is going to make them any better. I mean, you can't polish a turd. Well, you can if you freeze it, of course. But
so we're getting to the heart of the interview here, and but before we get there, in terms of students of sound production, when I say that, what I mean is someone who's interested in it, not necessarily on a course. What would you say is the biggest thing that someone who's interested in getting into sound needs?
I really think they need a firm grip of music, first of all, which they can keep hidden if they like, but they need a really firm grip of it.
Can I say you're the only person who I've done recording with who's ever asked, do you have a score, which just blew me away.
Well, there are a lot of people like me who do it, who understand it. And, we may not be great musicians at all, or even musicians, but we can read and understand music. And
how does that help us in the recording process?
Well, it helps enormously in anything orchestral, of course, because you have to be able to navigate quickly and you have to speak to a conductor and liaise with the orchestra. Otherwise, you're lost. So that's important. In pop music, but still, there are plenty of areas in pop music where there are string arrangements, and a lot of it can be scored. And if you're doing film music, it's fantastically useful to be able to use a score to navigate and also look at a shape, try and understand what the clients, what they're trying to do, just to get an understanding, a broad understanding. It's very good to have the thing on paper in front of you. Not always, absolutely not always, and this won't appeal or apply to everyone. It's helped me a lot just having a reasonable grip. And also when you're working with, if you're doing jazz or stuff that's got awkward time signatures, there's too many people coming out that don't understand much more than 4/4, or they don't really get it and they can't count properly. And
this is it's so amazing what you're talking about here, because when I think of all these courses, sound production courses, as far as I'm aware, the one thing they don't have is periods where they're or lessons where they're actually listening to music.
Yeah, and understanding.
It's all process.
So, for example, there are a few, and everyone knows about the Tonmeister course, the Surrey course, which is still probably the best course. And these guys, every time I work with them, they're totally great. Phil Hobbs at Lynn is fantastic, and Robert Gamage, who works for Lynn, and he's a Tonmeister as well. And it's a pleasure to work with these guys, because they're, I presume they're taught attitude. In other words, don't have one. And be able to meld and fit in any situation. I think the social skills are really very important in all of this. And I think they're well taught in that course. They understand the theory. The course basically is physics and music, and that's it makes a big difference. The guys coming out of that, they mostly get employed. And the BBC will take them because they know straight away that this... You don't have to think about it. They're taught the right way. But for courses that are purely technology and learning how to work or operate programs successfully, like Pro Tools or Logic or whatever, my feeling is 2 weeks is plenty. 2 weeks, teach someone everything they need to know about operating that, and then send them off to do it and learn it.
So, Calum, within that, do you have this is an odd one because I hear people talking about desks having sounds and programs having sound. I don't really get that, but do you strive to create a specific sound, a Calum Malcolm sound almost, or are you purely focused on just capturing the best image of the sound that's made, and an addendum to that? If there was a Calum Malcolm sound, does it come in post-production?
Well, I would say I don't have an approach, Calum Malcolm sound. I know I see it sometimes in reviews and people commenting about it and saying, oh, there's a 3D thing or there's space or whatever. That's absolutely not a conscious thing, though. I think it's probably because of my interest in classical music in particular and that type of recording, in other words, recording an event which has naturally got a 3D aspect to it. I probably subconsciously inject some of that sometimes into what I'm doing. But I would hate the idea of trying to imprint a sound onto somebody's record. My principal concern is to record them in the fashion that they wish to be recorded and make them sound the way they want to sound, not the way I want them to sound.
So the Blue Nile, for example, I mean, they have such a distinct sound.
But I think that's them. It just is them. That's what they are. You could almost level the. It's a musical thing for them if you actually analysed it and look at the sort of shapes that are being played, the sort of thing that Paul Buchanan or Paul Moore, the type of notes that Robert Bell plays on the bass. It's different to anyone else. They have their unique sound, and lots of bands have that. It's a great thing. I think that's their sound. I think it's more to do with the harmonic content than the recorded aspect of it. That's my personal opinion. They set up moods through what they're doing, not how they sound. I know the space and some of it, that's because there's space in the music. You know, they've made that space, that's the arrangement. Not what I do, I think.
You are listening to GMI, Guitar and Music Institute. My name is Jed Brockey, and I'm in conversation with Calum Malcolm, sound producer, and we've just been talking about sound. But you mentioned earlier, Calum, about Lynn Records. Now you had you've done a lot of work with Lynn. Could you maybe tell the listeners about Lynn? Lynn produce high quality hi-fi, don't they? And
yeah.
Lynn Records was an offshoot of that.
Correct.
Could you maybe tell us a little?
Okay, I met Ivor Tiefenbrunn, whose company is Lynn, in 1975. I think they opened in 1974 or 75, which is when I opened Castle Sound. And I met Ivor because of I'd been working in the hi-fi shop before, so I knew about hi-fi a bit. And he insisted that he could provide me with a pair of monitor speakers. And he did. And they were appalling. And they blew up almost immediately. And but we still got on fine. They were hi-fi speakers and didn't work in the professional environment. They just wouldn't. It was the wrong kind of thing. But we got on very well over the years and stayed in touch. And eventually they decided to experiment with cutting records. And they bought a lathe. I think it might have been a Scully, but I can't remember. So a record cutting lathe back in sometime in the early 80s this would have been, or very late 70s. By this time I'd moved studio. I'd moved out of Edinburgh and moved into the old school in Pencaitland in East Lothian. So still Castle Sound, but a much bigger operation. Properly professional and really, and the studio still exists today.
Yeah, it's a fantastic place.
It's a good place. I sold it in 1998 to Freeland Barber, and the place with Stuart Hamilton as the engineer, and it's still a joy to go to, and I still loved being there. But while I was there, I still had a great relationship with Lynn, and they bought this lathe, they started cutting records, and at that point they decided to start a record label and called it Lynn Records. I provided the first recordings for that, including the Blue Nile, funnily enough. That was because we'd been working together, and that seemed to work as an idea. I took the stuff we'd been doing to Lynn, and they liked it, and they released the first album and the second album. But we did a lot of jazz stuff, Carol Kidd as well, and began to do more and more. And
Did
they
Martin
started
Taylor
doing Martin Taylor. And then that grew, Stefan Grappelli, all these great artists and great fun.
What was it like meeting Stefan?
Oh, he was good, yeah. I've got I found, we actually, because we're moving house, we were digging out all the old photos recently, my wife and I were looking for, there's some great photos of us in Paris with Stefan Grappelli.
Where else?
I know, because we did a couple of albums with him and Martin Taylor. Great fun.
Disley? Was he on that one?
Who?
Disley? On rhythm guitar? No, because Martin was the second guitarist.
Right. I don't remember that.
No.
I don't remember that.
I was lucky to see Stefan twice, actually, and a fantastic pianist.
Mm-hmm.
Did you record him playing piano?
Just fiddle. Just
fiddle.
violin, yeah. More reverb, monsieur. More reverb. Is mostly. That was the instruction. I mean, I couldn't have given him any more. He loved it. He loved it. Yeah.
What do you feel about the whole Lynn thing? Is it an episode of your life that's now completely finished?
No, we still do stuff. I did an album last year for Lynn in New York with Barb Younger, the cabaret jazz singer. I love Barb. She does these fantastic deconstructed records, Bob Dylan, Jacques Brel, that sort of thing. She'll pick an artist and take a group of songs and then really deconstruct the original thing and take it down to either a very still piano arrangement, and she gets killer musicians to play with her. Very good, actually. We did it at the Hit Factory, so we had a bit of fun there. Nice studio. And I still help Philip Hobbs now and again doing larger orchestral sessions, and sometimes I'll do them. If he's not able to do them, I'll do them.
What has been I'm going to go into almost quick fire, but what's been the most difficult recording session? Is there one?
I can't really. I mean, there are technically difficult ones now and again.
See these military ones. I saw
I did a lot of stuff in the 70s, in the late 70s in Germany. Army of the Rhine recordings. So would have been the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, Blues and Royals. They were very straightforward. They were fantastically organised, of course, because they're army.
And so I take it I was thinking about this last night. Are the mics set at the side of the field or the area?
No, we do them inside. So
Right.
they're done in big halls. Rehearsal halls are big or big spaces, and
Right.
they all have big spaces. These regiments, for parading or whatever.
And how many mics would you use on something like that?
Maybe, but it wasn't that many. I think we probably used. In fact, I'm sure back in the day, I had my portable mixer was 16 channels, so it would have been 16 mics. And the interesting thing is that they were all done direct to stereo, so no multi-track, just mixed. So you would balance, and that was it, finished.
I think it's called on the fly.
Yeah,
nowadays.
But you'd have the record was 2.25 hours for an entire album, done, finished.
Boom.
Yeah, and it's still something I really enjoy. And in fact, the BBC asked me to do 2 or 3 years running. In about 10 years ago, I did the late night concerts and some of the principal concerts from the Usher Hall during the Edinburgh Festival, the Radio 3 broadcasts. So I was a balance engineer for those, and it's a real thrill. It's great fun just doing it, and there's no rehearsal. Yeah. It's a joy to do that.
The Neve desk.
Which Neve desk?
Exactly. So you love Neve, don't you?
I still really like them. I still love. They are different. Neves, SSLs, all that. The SSL was very successful. The SSL, when it came out, had quite a restricted sound to it, which made it totally suitable for doing a lot of pop music, where you don't want everything to sound big. I think everyone seems to think that, it has a great big fat sound, that's great. Well, you can't fit 40 great big fat sounds together. It doesn't work. So,
Calum, do you have an image of what you want to create before you hear it, depending on what you're...
Providing I've heard the music first, then I would think, yeah, I know where that could go. Absolutely. But the reason and there are so many great pop records made on SSL consoles and not necessarily on Neve consoles, because I think the smaller in sound of the SSL in inverted commas really helped everything fit together. They were great at that. Neves could sound a bit big, actually. But for rock, a lot of people love Neves because there's not so much going on. There's not so many overdubs. Whereas with pop, and if you're trying to put a lot in and there's a lot of sub or whatever, SSL was a good choice, I think, back in the day. Nowadays, though, I've always been comfortable with Neve. I do like, and I loved AMEC consoles in the day, and I had two great consoles. All that, that's really what I lived. That's what I liked at the time. In the 80s, I thought AMECs were amazing.
So behind you is a smaller Neve than I remember the last time I was here,
yeah.
and you mainly do, is it mixing and mastering in this space?
Some recording. There's a vocal booth, and people like coming here and doing their vocals, or an overdub, or guitars, or something like that. But that's it. We'll have been in the studio or on location doing the main recording, and then come back here to finish.
So would you have them hire out a room if there was drums and this and that?
Yeah, we'll go to a studio, or I'll just take stuff. I do a lot of stuff on location.
Preferably in Italy, I would thought.
If I can get away with it. Or Donegal.
Or Donegal.
I've done a load of albums with the Henry girls, who are three girls from Donegal, and it's hysterically funny. It's great fun. It's always a complete shambles, but we have an absolute ball, and we usually record in their aunt's B&B, in the bed and breakfast, right in the living room. and I take what I need on the plane. I drive from here to Glasgow Airport, and I get the Ryanair flight from there to Derry, right? And that's sometimes 19 minutes if you're lucky in the plane, or it's a full-size plane. It's a proper big Boeing and all that. You get off at the other end 20 minutes later and go to their house and set up, and we spend a week there making a record, and then on the last day they drive me to Liam Bradley's house. Liam Bradley he's a world-class drummer. He's great. He's Van Morrison's drummer at the moment, but I mean he's Ronan Keating's drummer, and he's he plays with everyone. I mean he's fantastic. I really love Liam, and he lives in a fabulous house on the banks of the Foyle there, literally on the water. It's a converted hospital, I think it is. It's like one big room. Right. Not a huge place, but it's a lovely spot, and he just has a massive drum kit set up in his living room, but his living room's 26 feet high, something like that. And he's just got a pair of mics in the room. I don't take anything. I just plug into his system, and we have an enjoyable day or two recording drums and percussion there, and then the record's done.
So Spinal Tapish, have a good time all the time.
It's great. It's I love recording like that. I like just going to spaces and houses and setting up, and it's good. Good fun.
Favourite equipment? Got any favourite other than the Neve? Is there anything?
The only thing I do like there are certain microphones which are still useful, and of course they're impossibly expensive now. But because I've been doing it for so long, I had them anyway. So bought them when they were new and cheaper. So there are certain Neumanns that are good. Although I did get rid of my U47 recently. I found I wasn't using it so much. But 49s, Neumann M49 is a great microphone. And the U67 is still pretty much unbeatable for acoustic guitar. I think it's I've yet to find anything that quite does what that mic does.
Has the march of technology, the constant change, etc., has that changed the way you record?
Of course, yeah. So we've progressed, really. I started with 2-track, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 24, then 32-track digital, and then finally then to 48-track digital, and then over to DAWs like Pro Tools and all the rest of it. I was quite late to all of that. I didn't enjoy it. I thought they sounded absolutely appalling to begin with.
What do you mean by sounded?
They didn't do what the older machines did. Any of the good digital machines. I like a machine that I can't hear, basically. And we always strove for that, even with the analog stuff. People now get 2-inch machines and record onto them, and then record onto Pro Tools, which, well, whatever. You can do that if you like, but I mean, it just gives it a sound. If that's the sound you want, then fair enough. And there are some plugins that do that quite well as well. But
what do you think of those plug-in emulators?
Yeah, they're fine if that's what you want. But I think there's quite a lot of us that did it anyway and are quite glad not to be doing it, because we always thought that 2-inch machines sounded pretty crap back in the day. You never got your snare drum to sound like it did real ever. It was always a bit saturated, and it helped in some situations, and it flattened it and made it sit better in some situations. But if you were trying to record something and you wanted a lot of transient on it, you never really got that. And so digital recording was very interesting. At the For us, when it first came in, it was very interesting because you could record transients properly, and you could record bass. It actually did record bass.
Transients?
Yeah, a snare drum that sounded like the drummer played it in the room and not soggy when it came back. But of course, soggy became really fashionable. That's the thing. People then began to like that kind of thing. And it's horses for courses. I mean, people really enjoy doing all that stuff, and fair play, that's okay. If that's what you enjoy doing, then why not do it? For me, I'm not that interested in it. I like things to sound more like the source, and I don't really go in for huge amounts of processing. A good compressor is a great tool, and sometimes a bit of EQ, but I'm not mad for it, really.
This is GMI, Guitar Music Institute, and you're listening to me, Jed Brocky, speaking to producer Calum Malcolm. Okay, Calum, we're coming to the end now. Just a few little questions left, really. Do you keep up with all the latest gadgets? Do you Sound on Sound? I used to buy that magazine all the time. I don't know. Do you? It's just like a huge wish list of things.
No, I mean, I never read. I don't really read the things. I don't read the magazines. I have to admit that. I was never that interested. It's quite hard. I always found to find a bad review for they all seem to be. Everything's great, and frankly,
Funny that, isn't it?
Isn't it funny? Yeah. I don't expect they're getting them for nothing or anything, but you never know. But how can you possibly read a review of a piece of equipment that's glowing from beginning to end, because you know perfectly well it doesn't really mean anything. So I never paid attention to any of that. You have to try something out for yourself and see if it's any good. And a lot of the time, it's no different to something that's been before. I have no wish list at all. Of course, every plugin on the planet's available, and now and again you come across stuff that is genuinely useful. And there are a set of plugins that I use and enjoy. I like the Oxford stuff. I think it's good. Some of the Wave stuff is great. Some of the Slate digital stuff is great. But I don't really use tons and tons of it. It's useful now and again. It really is. And if you're trying to shape something, you can do almost everything. That's interesting. That you can do almost everything. If you're using it to shape things too much, if you're using it just to save a project, it becomes less interesting, I must admit. And I know we've all been in that situation where you're having to save a project, and things become much less interesting at that point, I must say. But there are some amazing tools there that help you fix everything if you really need to do that.
So I hope I'm not spoiling any confidences, and if I am, this will be cut out anyway. So you're about to move out of here to another part of Scotland. What projects are coming up, and will it affect the kind of projects that you do?
Yeah, it's a good point. We've been here 33 years now, and a huge amount of recording has gone on here, apart from the stuff I've done in other studios, but a lot of mixing and a lot of mastering. So I need to build a new room, and I'm thinking about that at the moment. And I do have a lot of work on Japanese stuff that I've been doing over the last few years.
Tell us about that. That sounds...
Well, I've kind of worked in Tokyo a lot since the mid-90s, and there are a few clients there, and I'm still doing stuff for them. It's a totally different vibe, of course. And their whole approach. Well, they've got a lot about Oh, I mean, culturally, it's quite alien, and it takes quite a bit of getting used to. Which is what I love about it. To be honest, it's so different to us, and they are so different. It's actually refreshing that everyone's not the same. It's good. And I enjoy working out there, but latterly, over the last few years, they send me stuff to mix. And I've done a number of albums. A band called Sing Like Talking, who are a big band in Japan. older band. It's always impeccably done, and the musicianship is outrageous.
So is technology meaning you're not getting to go to Italy, etc.
No,
anymore? They're just sending you stuff.
they everything just comes over the wire now.
Yeah.
But it's good and it's quick, and doing revisions and sending mixes back, it's brilliant. Of course, the internet's really.
But you miss out
there.
on.
But you miss out on the trips. But they're still there. You know, I still get the trips, and there's still, there'll be something in Europe or America. And in fact, I was out recording in Australia last year. I was in Melbourne for a couple of weeks. So there's always something on like that. Yeah.
What music do you listen to, Calum? Do you get a chance to listen to much music?
I don't listen much now. No, I used to listen all the time. I listen rarely now because at the end of the day, the last thing I want to do is carry on listening. And I found the older I get, ears get tired much more quickly. There's a big difference there. I mean, it's very interesting the way hearing changes. And I've noticed, of course, everyone's hearing deteriorates to a certain extent, some more than others. The benefit of having done something like this is if you haven't ruined your ears, and that's more a performance thing, playing on stage. And I used to play in bands, and if you're next to a monitor, you're going to kill your hearing. You really are, and you're going to end up with tinnitus or whatever. If you've tried to help, and not monitor too loud for most of your life, then your hearing it'll be better later on. And the other thing is, because you've trained your ears, you haven't deliberately trained your ears, but your ears have been trained through your job, then they work better later on. I have the problem that most people have at my age, which is if you're in a clattery restaurant, it's pretty hard to hear conversation sometimes. That doesn't happen when you're younger.
It's hard to hear conversation in restaurants now because everyone's on their phone.
It's and people
talking
shout
to someone else.
People shout too much because they're terribly important, it would appear.
Yeah.
So there is that thing, but I don't have a problem at all. For example, of course, my high frequency has gone a bit over the years. It's still pretty good. It's nothing like it was when I was in my 20s. And there are certain things you can miss, but not sometimes. You might miss a bit of distortion that you would never have missed before. But it's amazing what your brain can do, because it's your brain that's analysing all of this, and the mechanical part of your hearing may well have taken a few steps down. But because of experience and the training thing that's gone in, and the way you listen, you just clearly automatically compensate for it. Otherwise, I'd be doing mixes that were too bright, and that doesn't happen. So obviously, because it's a fairly gradual process, your brain is compensating, and you've got a sound memory in there somehow that you're comparing against all the time. So you still know. It'll go eventually. It will start beginning to fail, but a few more years, I would have thought.
So we're at the final question, and I've really enjoyed talking with you, Calum. It's been really interesting hearing just almost this history of sound and recording in Scotland. And I would urge anyone out there who you've listened to a record, I'm sure, or a MP3 or some piece of music, then Calum will have. Unless you've lived in a cave, Calum will probably be in some of them. And I would encourage anyone to go to www.guitarmusicinstitute.com and look up this actual interview. And even if you're listening on iTunes, go or on internet radio, go to guitarmusicinstitute.com, look up this interview, and I'll put a whole bunch of links to Calum's website and his recordings and things like that. So the last question is, Calum, how do you see the evolution of audio recording? What is its future?
Technically, it's not getting better. It's getting slow. It's way too slow for me. I'll give you an example. At the moment, I'm working with Napier University, and we've been doing a project with the Rogue Orchestra. Now, they're a really interesting bunch of people. Two girls have set up this idea where to compete with some of the Eastern European orchestras. They've put an orchestra together, made up of players from the SCO and others from all over Britain, in fact, who are keen to come together, be flexible in what they do, and basically are there to do string parts or film scores or whatever to the very highest quality and highest standard. And we've done a couple of test sessions, and the idea is that the producer of the film or the project may be anywhere in the world. And I've been helping getting them going by producing the session locally. In other words, I will have the scores and I will liaise with the conductor and we'll record whatever the client wants to be recorded. But the client is on the other end of a link and they hear it in real time, and they can comment on the process.
This is quite interesting because I did some tests, I think 2 years ago for Napier, and it's a new internet link where all the universities across Europe, maybe the world, are linked up at incredibly high speeds.
Yes.
And I was actually playing a guitar, and there was a double bass player somewhere in England playing, and we were hearing each other playing with virtually
no latency.
Is this part of
this? This is exactly it. The difference is we're not doing the performance remotely. I mean, we don't have musicians in different places. We have the orchestra in a hall, and I'm recording them, but it's for a client in America, and the client is listening and commenting at the same time. The problem is that the communication system isn't working very well at the moment. It will. That's fine. That's just a technical hitch. But we have noticed that the latency can't go below a certain amount. Even the speed of light is way too slow. Here's the thing. People think the speed of light is infinitesimally fast. Well, apparently it is as fast as we're allowed to go, although there are theories that would like to disabuse that. I find it preposterous that things are as slow as the speed of light. Why should that be a limit? Why should that be the limit? It's very slow. If you think about it, if you're sending a signal, and it would never be at the speed of light, it should be. It was 50 years ago because you were picking up a phone and speaking to someone in America. No latency then. That was fine.
Why is it that the more technology goes on, the worse it gets?
Well, this is what I'm saying.
Digital radio.
It's far too slow. Everything you see on the television, the commentator's standing there like a numpty for 3 seconds before they answer back. Well, I'm sorry. It's absolutely not good enough. It's appalling. All the money that they can pump into it, and they can't get it in real time anymore. It's a joke. It's a complete joke. And so I find all of that very slow, and networked audio and all the problems that you can have with it. A piece of wire worked totally fine. And it's not as though the sound of things are getting that much better. I'm sorry, they're not. I still listen to masses of records and recordings that were made in the 50s and 60s that are still not, classical in particular. They're not really much better today.
Well, if you read the magazines, it's amazing that anything was recorded more than 5 years ago. Oh. Why are we still using cables, by the way?
Well, because they're reliable and they're fast.
Right. Is it because the industry doesn't want to go any other way?
You know perfectly well if these mics had been radio mics, somebody in a passing taxi would have ruined everything. I find technology, I find it obtrusive a lot of the time, and obstructive, to be perfectly honest. It's not quick enough. The way we record is quite slow as well. We've got all this fancy stuff going on, Pro Tools, unlimited tracks. You can do this, that, and the next thing. You know, you've got the senility factor built into Pro Tools, so even if you forget to press record, admittedly I do now and again, it's done it anyway in the background, so you know you're not a complete idiot. You can remember to press record at the end of the recording, and you've recorded something.
That takes away for the amateurs the one thing.
Yeah. But you know, I have to say that the sharpness, and back in the day when you had limited track count, 24 say, and if you had
this necessity is the mother of invention.
Well, absolutely. If you'd recorded a vocal and it wasn't quite right, then well, you better sing it better, because I'm going to wipe the one you've just done. How do you feel about doing that now? And it sharpens everyone up, because you can't have 50 takes or 10 takes to comp and put together. You just have to get it right. And
I have to say I agree with you,
you know,
it seems to be that they're making these programs for
bland, and it's
people.
Flat a lot of the time, you know, flat sounding. I mean, it's I don't think it gets better. It's getting different. And it's lovely that everyone can sit at home and make their own recordings. I think it's magnificent. Great fun for people. I think it's great. I love all of that. I think that's what's opened up. It's a tremendous hobby for a lot of people. And I think there's the excitement. And maybe that's where a lot of these courses are useful. You could maybe go and do a course now and again and learn a bit more about it.
And on that bombshell, Calum, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so very much for talking with GMI, and good luck with your move and all your future recordings.
Oh, thank you, Jed. Very nice seeing you again. Can I have my apple tart now?
It's a strawberry tart, and yes, you can.
Okay.
From me, Jed Brockey, and from Calum Malcolm.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.